have some background, assuming you have some background, then I definitely encourage people reading from different time periods and from people who are different, right? For example, I don't want Americans simply reading American evangelical authors.
Yeah. From the modern day.
Yeah, from the modern day. It's interesting. Protestants, think, oh, Catholics, they have a pope. Listen, conservative evangelicals have popes. And it can be a huge problem. And they've read everything from one individual. And the reality is all of us have strengths and weaknesses and blind spots. So one of the things I encourage is people to read Christians from the different periods. C.S. Lewis has this wonderful introduction to Athanasius, who was an early church father, had a little volume called On the Incarnation, and C.S. Lewis wrote an introduction for one of its publications, and he talks about why we read old books. And he basically says, well, I'll put it the way I would think, but all of us have blind spots. But one of the problems culturally is we tend to, it's like in a marriage, you tend to share blind spots, and so you don't know what they are. So if you read someone from the 3rd century, they don't have the same blind spots as you. Now, one of the things that it's a danger in Reform communities, we do this with the Reformers or with the Puritans, they had blind spots too. They were sinners, right? There are some deeply problematic. If you're an African American and you're being told to study the Puritans, if the person telling you to study the Puritans doesn't acknowledge some of the problems there, we've got ourselves an issue, right? So Athanasius in the early church, the Reformers, whatever, they all had sins. But interestingly enough, when you read them from centuries later, you don't tend to be tempted by the same things. So C.S. Lewis is saying, it's not that we don't have to romanticize them. They sinned, but they're tempted by things you won't be. But it also means they weren't tempted by your things, right? So Athanasius was not dealing with the materialism of 21st century America. And so all of a sudden, you read him, you think, whoa, or whatever our sins are. And so it just kind of, and Lewis, in Lewis kind of way, he says, if we could read books from the future, they'd be just as good. But we don't have access to them. So I do think encouraging people to read Luther, to read a Calvin, to read an Owen, to read an early church father or mother, I think is very, and I encourage men to read female authors, female theologians, females doing ministry. I think it's very important, and it's been an area of neglect, to be honest with you. And similarly, we don't think twice about asking women to read men. So I think this is a growing area of need for us that can help us see some of our own blind spots and weaknesses. So that would be one of them.
That's very helpful.